Hi there, I'm Betsy de Thierry, and I'm a psychotherapist, I'm a teacher, I'm a mum of 4 sons who are 23, 21, 17 and 12. And I'm here to talk a little bit about trauma, what trauma is and how it impacts children and young people particularly, and what that looks like in terms of behaviour, and a little bit of what we can do to help the behaviour change. I've also written a whole bunch of different books, and all the books are all the same kind of stuff. It's all about children and young people and what trauma is. So let's start at the beginning. What is trauma? Lots of people say to me, oh, surely everybody's traumatised these days. And that's a really good question, but not actually. They're not all traumatised. You see, trauma is any experience where we feel terrified, powerless and overwhelmed. So I don't know whether you've maybe had experiences, probably, where you've been terrified, powerless and overwhelmed. But the difference is when an adult experiences that, we're generally less powerless than a child. When a child's terrified, then actually they look for an adult to help them out of it, because children know that they need adults. We're one of the few species on earth that actually, when a baby's born, they can't do anything. Little ones know that they need an adult to look after them. So they're born powerless, they're very, very powerless. And so when they're terrified and powerless, that's really the definition of trauma. So any experience where the child is terrified and powerless is what we would call trauma. When a child has experienced terror and powerlessness, but they're able to run to an adult immediately who can comfort and support them and help them work out what they felt, then the impact on their life is significantly reduced. We recognise, don't we, that very often when children experience terror and powerlessness, they can't run to an adult. Either there isn't an adult there, or the adult, if they tell the adult might go into overwhelm, they might get frightened themselves. And the child doesn't want to hurt the adult. Or they know that if they tell the adult, then they might get told off. So very often the child is left with terror, powerlessness and overwhelm. They feel overwhelmed by what's happened to them, with no resolve, no one to help them. So if we think about that as the definition of trauma, and we can recognise that there's lots of different settings where children are traumatised, what we need to recognise is that when a child is traumatised, it impacts their emotions. They're left with big, strong, massive emotions that they don't know what to do with. They're impacted on their learning. A lot of children find it really difficult to focus on, concentrate at school because they've been traumatised. And so their entire nervous system, their whole body, the way they're wired is geared to wait for the next disaster, wait for the next thing that might terrify them. So learning is really difficult. Engaging with their schoolwork seems pointless because all they want to do is use all their energy to try and survive. Trauma can impact relationships. They can find trust really difficult. They can often want to reject people before they get rejected themselves. And so they can find relationships really tricky. Trauma can also impact behaviour. And so there's so many different possible behaviours that can be directly because the child has experienced events and periods of time where they've just felt terrified and powerless. And now they're showing these different behaviours that often they don't know why they're doing it. What kind of behaviours? Well, the kind of behaviours are either acting out or acting in. That's the best way of thinking about it. When we, as adults, feel very overwhelmed or terrified or powerless, we too might either act in. We might find ourselves feeling bad about ourselves, feeling shame, feeling like we hate ourselves and we wish we had a different life. We might find other ways of acting in, like overeating or undereating or drinking or turning to substances that help numb our feelings. None of those things work. But sometimes we end up doing those things just to try and cope with the feeling of terror and powerlessness. Children are the same. They either act in on very similar ways, we might find that because a child has experienced terror and powerlessness, they're now hating themselves. They might say horrible things about themselves. They might end up trying to hurt themselves. They might do self-harming things, or they might find addictions in screens or food or other substances that help numb those feelings that are so big and seem so overwhelming. Or they might act out. And in acting out, it's them expressing and trying to get rid of that big sense of, oh, it felt so frightening and now I don't know what to do. And in acting out, we see children often fighting, being aggressive, being angry, maybe being defiant and refusing to do what we say. But when we understand all of these behaviours from a trauma lens, like we put trauma glasses on, we can see that actually sometimes a child is going to go, no, because they've experienced some very terrifying events and terrifying things where they were powerless. They couldn't say no. They didn't know how to say no. They felt trapped into things that have really harmed them and really frightened them, and they couldn't say no. So now one of their coping mechanisms is to say no to every adult, or to reject the adults and be nasty to the adults that are trying to care for them, because they're so scared that if they learn to love someone else, what if that person lets them down? What if that person doesn't come back? And so they reject us that look after them. They can be horrible to us. They can say no to us. They can refuse to do what we ask them to do. And it's really hard as the adults looking after children who have been traumatized and show these very strong trauma symptoms or trauma behaviors. But what we recognize when we put our trauma glasses on is on the inside of the child that's being very loud and angry and cross and saying no, or being very secretive and self-harming and self-hating and wanting to withdraw or hide. On the inside of that 10-year-old or 12-year-old or 20-year-old is a little person that's actually very, very frightened, who's actually ever so desperate for the adults in their world to love them and to care for them and nurture them. When I work with children who have been very traumatized, I have to remind myself that all the time, especially when they're trying to be nasty to me and they're swearing their head off at me. I have to remember all the time, Betsy, this isn't about you. This is children who are frightened. This kid is frightened that you're going to take control off them. You're going to take power off them. You're going to do something frightening to them. And they're in survival coping mechanisms. They're like, get away from me. But on their inside, they ever so want us to keep trying and not to give up. So I hope that's helpful, just thinking about what the definition of trauma is. What kind of experiences have the children that we're caring for been through? And what could the impact of those be on their learning, on their emotions, on their behaviour, on their relationships? And therefore, what's that telling us that they need? Well, really what that's telling us they need is they desperately need adults who understand that although some of the behaviour is wrong, that the child is only trying to defend themselves. And so what can be explosive is being very angry with them and saying, stop doing that, you mustn't do that. Have you noticed that can really, it's like putting a match to a bit of fuel, isn't it? But what they actually need us to do is be consistent in our approach of kindness, compassion, being really as gentle as we can, but firm. Making sure that the vibe that we carry is one they know that we believe in them. And we know that they're going to recover from this. And their behaviour doesn't define who they are. It's just them expressing from a subconscious, automatic, primitive, survival part of their brain. They're trying to cope. They're not making bad choices. They're not wanting to hurt us. They're not wanting to be annoying. That it's an automatic reaction to feelings of terror and powerlessness. And if our approach is one where we're able to be curious, not furious. And we can slowly go, I'm just wondering what's going on. I'm wondering how I can support you better. I'm wondering what we can do here. I'm wondering how we can help you not need to kick, scream, steal, bite, wet yourself, hurt yourself, have a temper tantrum, all the other things that they might be doing. And it's really hard, isn't it, when you guys are probably living through 24/7 really explosive or very concerning behaviours. But if we put our trauma glasses on, we can see that the children aren't trying to hurt us, they're trying to defend themselves. And if we can be consistent in supporting each other, I do believe we all need each other. We need other people that understand this to support us as we're consistent in our care and our nurture and our being curious, not furious, being supportive and firm, but believing the best in the child and speaking into their future, that one day they won't have that inner turmoil and inner fire of pain and trauma symptoms left. I hope that helps you have a little think about the impact of trauma and what children and young people really need, but how they really can't usually ask for it in the way that is most helpful. Bye.